so forth. So the 10th decile is the last decile, and that's the average income essentially of my top 10%. Whereas the average income of the first decile will be the average income of the bottom 10% in the income distribution. Okay, so that's my 90-10 ratio. That is an example of a dispersion ratio. You can get other dispersion ratios. I don't really have a lot of examples of them, but all they're going to be is taking a certain decile or quantile and putting it over another one so that we have this ratio. So you guys know how to read ratios. If the 90-10 ratio, for example, was equal to 5, right? All it means is that the top, right? The top part, the numerator in your fraction is 5 times what is in the denominator. So if this was equal to 5, it would be telling me that the average income of the 10th decile is 5 times the average income of the first decile. So obviously it just depends on what ratio they give you, right? And you would be able to then interpret it accordingly. Cool. So give me a thumbs up if everyone understands this concept of dispersion ratios. It's pretty simple stuff, right? But you just want to make sure that you understand it correctly, because you can make errors if you don't know what you're interpreting. So give me a thumbs up, and if you have a question, now's the time. If we have any problems, now's the time to let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to move on. Is everyone good? Everyone's good? Cool. We're going to carry on then. So the next thing that we look at are the Lorenz curves and the Gini coefficient. And we're going to just take a moment to recap what you guys learned last semester. So I'm going to erase this, going once, going twice. Right. So the second types of measures, we look at the Lorenz curve and the Gini coefficient. All right, so we're basically just going to do a quick recap on this because you did learn about it last year, but you've got to make sure. So guys, just to address the question from Jessica, I'm not going to be moving through this as much as of a 19.1, 19.2, 19.3 way as we have before. So what we're looking at right now is still measuring income inequality. Then we're going to move on to types of inequality and so on and so forth, because it's better to rather mix a few of the sections and so on. So I'm basing this off of how your lecturers have been doing it. They've kind of mixed and muddled things a little bit, and I actually see why they did it, because the way that the unit has been laid out from point 1 to point 2 to point 3 to point 4 isn't perfect. Okay, so I'm addressing the question in the chat room. Is this now 19.2? I think this is, I think we started actually already in 19.2 with measuring income inequality. I have been using your slides to ensure that I'm focusing on what's important, because from what I understand, your lecturers have told you, the slides tell you what to study in the textbook. So I've been using that to then go and look at the textbook. Give me a thumbs up if everyone's happy with this. Jessica, are we good? Is everyone solid? Yeah? Okay, awesome. Sweet, guys. So let's carry on. So we're looking at the Lorenz curve and the Gini coefficient. So we're going to start with the Lorenz curve, which is then used to calculate the Gini coefficient. Okay? So let's draw a graph, right? We're going to draw a graph, and on this, on the bottom one, what we're going to have is the percentage of the population. And on my y-axis, I'm going to have percentage of income. Now we know that the greatest percentage, right? The greatest percentage that we have is 100% and 100%. Okay, so we create a bit of a box here. Cool. And we know that if income, right? We know that if income is perfectly distributed, if income were to be perfectly distributed, we would have a straight line.
Okay.
Right? We would have a straight line there if income was perfectly distributed. And why? What does that mean? Okay? So what this means is my straight line would show, and this is how we read this, right? So work with me, everyone. Let's write 25%, 50%, and 75%. So we're going to work in the quantiles. So a perfectly straight line would mean that 50% of my income is owned by 50% or is consumed by 50% of the population or earned by 50% of the population. So the bottom 50% earn 50% and the top 50% earn 50%. Okay. Likewise, the bottom 25% earn 25%, and the second 25%, which we read from 25 to 50, are also earning 25% of the income, and so on and so forth. Okay, so if we had a straight line, then there essentially would be no bottom and top. I hope you guys kind of get that. There would be no bottom or top if we had a perfectly straight line, because income would be perfectly distributed. So there would be no poor, there would be no rich. Everyone in the economy would essentially be earning the same amount. Thumbs up if you're following me and if you understand this. Everyone good? Going once, going twice. All right, cool. But now we're gonna get into the real, the nitty-gritty of this. Okay? So a Lorenz curve is never straight because we don't have perfect equality anywhere in the world, doesn't exist. So what we generally have is a Lorenz curve that looks like this. All right? So I've plotted this so that these two numbers match, right? The 25 now matches with the 50%, and the 50% matches with the 75%. Okay. And we'll figure out what that is in a second. Cool. So let's read this. Let's make sense of what this thing is now saying to us. What this is now saying, okay, the way that I've drawn this, is that the first quantile, right? The first quantile. Who are the first quantile? That's my 0 to 25, okay? The first quantile, they're earning what I'm gonna draw right as 10%, okay? So the first quantile of the economy earn 10% of income. First quantile are earning 10% of income, okay? The second quantile, my second quantile, which is going to be, right, my 25 to 50. Does everyone follow? That's how we're reading our quantiles here, okay? 0 to 25 is the first quantile, 25 to 50 is the second quantile, okay? So now how do we calculate how much income they're earning or what share of income they're earning? We see this by then taking the point where we have 25, where we start this quantile, and seeing that that's 10%. And at the end of my quantile, second quantile, where we have 50%, we see that that's 25% income. So what's the difference between 25 and 10? 15%. What this line is showing is that this quantile earns income equal to 25 minus 10%. So that's going to be 15%. Give me a thumbs up if everyone's following what I'm saying here. All right, give me a thumbs up if everyone's following this. Cool. So we can just quickly move on then. The third quantile, right? Our third quantile, which would be from 50 to 75, right? From 50 to 75, we see that they're earning 25%, right? They earn 25% because we go from 25 to 50, okay? And then my fourth quantile, right? My fourth quantile, they're earning, so that's 75 to 100. If we go up, we see that 75% of the economy earn 50%, and the other 25% earn another 50%, okay? So the fourth quantile, they earn 50% of the income. And thus we can see now that we have economic inequality. The bottom 25% earn 10%. The next 25% earn 15%. The next quarter of the economy earns 25%, and the final quarter earns 50%. So that is how we're going to read the Lorenz curve. Everyone, give me a thumbs up if this makes sense to you so that we can move on to the next part. All right. Thumbs up all around. Everyone's good. Going once, going twice. Okay, sweet. I know I'm moving quite fast, guys, but as always, we've got quite a lot of content to work through. So I'm going to give everyone one moment just to take a note, write down everything that we've got here, and I'm going to erase the board and move on. So we're going once, going twice, no questions. All right, solid, guys. So the next thing then, continuing in this part, in this section, is calculating the Gini coefficient. So I think what's quite clear in my Lorenz curve, okay, where we've got 100, and this is percentage population, remember, and percentage income, that the further the Lorenz curve goes out, right? So the farther the Lorenz curve is away from my straight line, the more economic inequality we have, okay? So the farther out the Lorenz curve, the higher the inequality. So in order to calculate the Gini coefficient, right? In order to calculate the Gini coefficient, in order to measure income inequality, we look at, right? We look at the size of this area, right? So I'm going to call this A. Okay, I'm going to call this A. And on the inside here, I'm going to call this B. So the further we go out, the further my Lorenz curve goes out, the larger A will be and the smaller B will be, okay? So that's how we're going to start to identify, right, the size of our income inequality. And our Gini coefficient is going to basically just say how much of this full triangle is being eaten up by A. The Gini coefficient is going to be A over A plus B. So we just want to know what portion of this total triangle, the A plus B, is made up of A. The larger the Gini coefficient, right? Larger Gini means larger, more economic inequality. More inequality. Okay, guys, give me a thumbs up if everyone's with me. I know I'm moving very fast through this, but this is content from last year, right? This is from your first year syllabus, but it's really important for what we're doing today. So just make sure that you're all with me. Okay. So if there's anything going once, I'm still giving time for a question. If anyone has a question, please let me know. If there's anything you want me to just go through one more time, please let me know, right? Now is your time to do it. Going once, going twice. Okay, cool. And something that we also want to note is that, right, if you were given an example with a very small population, so they say to you, calculate the Gini coefficient, and they give you 10 people. So first of all, guys, I think you all are problem solvers, and you should be able to now, given the tools that you've been provided, to do that. But let's just understand the approach. Let's say they gave you 10 people, and they gave you the amount of income that every single person earned. What you would want to do then is say, sum up all the income and say, what's the total income in the economy? And then you want to go and calculate, all right, person A earned 10 Rand, what's the percentage of the total income? And you calculate the percentage that everyone's earning, right? Once you've done that, you would be able to plot the Lorenz curve, and you would be able to calculate the Gini coefficient using some geometry and some maths, okay? But if you were given a small right, a small population, then your Gini is going to be equal to n over n plus 1, right? N over n plus 1, I'm sorry, n over n minus 1 times by a over a plus b. Okay, and there's a good example in the online core textbook that you can go look at, right? Where they do they give you a model with 2 people and they show you why this is necessary. We're not gonna, it's not necessary for us to go through that. But if we're dealing with small population, okay, with small population. So just make sure, yes, with n being the population size. Thank you, Jessica. So n is the number of people in the population, and we're going to take n over n minus 1 and times it by a over a plus b. All right. Are there any questions? Is everyone happy, right? If everyone's good, then we're going to move on. Cool. There are some people experiencing audio problems, right? So just please check the audio settings on your device via the Zoom menu, okay? If you can't, if you have any issues, just exit and re-enter, and we'll re-let you in, and you should be sorted out after that. But otherwise, give me a round of thumbs up if we're ready to move on, and we can go straight into the types of inequality. Cool. Fantastic. Right, so we're going to look at types of inequality. Types of inequality. And sorry, one thing I just want to mention when it comes to the Lorenz curve and the Gini coefficient, okay? We can measure, sorry, so I'm just carrying on, can also measure wealth, right? We can be looking at wealth, market income, right? Or disposable income. So we know that income inequality, we know that inequality, economic inequality in general, right, depends on what we're measuring. So in other words, we might have more, in South Africa, for example, we have very high wealth inequality. So remember what wealth is. Wealth is the stock of money that you piled up and the stock of assets that you piled up. It's not income, which is what you earn every month or every year, okay? So in South Africa, we have very bad income inequality, but we have even much worse wealth inequality, okay? So what I just want to say is that it's not just simply always going to be income, but you might be looking at disposable income, which is after taxes, or you might be looking at market income, right, which is before taxes, okay? Or we might be looking at wealth, the assets that people have managed to accumulate. So just let me know if that makes sense, and we'll move on. So apologies, I should have just written it down, Matthew. My N is equal to population, okay? Is equal to population. Okay, cool, guys. If you don't have any other questions, then we're going to move on. We're going once, we're going twice. I'm going to erase this. So just make this note. We can use this to measure wealth, market income, disposable income, and possibly other, right, other metrics, but it's generally going to be one of those 2. Cool. So N is my population, Matthew, right? I hope you've written that down because I'm going to erase that now. Okay, sweet. So we're done with measuring income inequality. So for those of you, right, I know you guys always want me to make sure that I've got good headings. So that was measuring income inequality. We're now going to be looking at, right, types of inequality. Types of inequality. Okay, so again, we've just spoken about it. We can look at inequality, can look at it in terms, right, We can look at it in terms of various different things. We can look at it in terms of wealth. We can look at it in terms of earnings. Okay, so we're thinking of that as market income. Or it could be disposable income. Okay, so we've got different types of different lenses that we can use, different measurements, things that we measure, and those could be wealth, that could be total earnings. In other words, how much value does someone create? What is their total market income before taxes, right? Or we could be looking at disposable income, which is going to give us a better understanding of how much money people actually have at the disposal. Okay, so that's just one thing to note here. The second thing that I want you guys to note, right, is we can look at economic inequality in countries, right, or between countries, right, or, right, we can look at all people in the world. So income inequality can be measured with different comparisons, right? We can be looking at total world population. We can be looking at people within a particular country. We could look at income inequality within a city, right? Or we could look at income inequality between countries, where we look at the GDP per capita or the average disposable income for each nation, right? So we can compare different things, different people, and that's going to influence, you know, what type of inequality we are essentially measuring. So everyone give me a thumbs up if that makes sense. Please give me a thumbs up if that makes sense. Cool. We're good all around. Going once, going twice. Okay, cool, guys. Now the more important stuff that we want to be learning about is these two terms, which I'm about to write up on the board. So one of the types of inequality that we are going to be looking at is, right, categorical inequality. Okay, so categorical inequality. This is the type of inequality that we talk about a lot in our society. This is, right, going to be due to right? So income inequality due to people or to different, so due to differences among people leading to categorization. All right, so basically what we're saying is we're looking at income inequality amongst people in terms of, right, sex, right, race, citizenship, etc., etc. So basically anything where we've categorized people. We've said male, female, okay? We've said South African, Zimbabwean, Botswanan, American, right? We've said black, white, colored, so on and so forth, okay? So categorical inequality is when we see income inequality between different categories of people, right? Basically where we say the differences among people, right? Because of the differences in their sex or the differences in their gender, right? Leads to a income inequality along those lines. Give me a thumbs up if everyone understands this, okay? Give me a thumbs up if everyone understands this. And something to understand is not controlled for other differences within the groups. Or sorry, other differences between the groups. So all this is saying is that we don't control for the fact that maybe one group is different to the other group in a way that is in another way other than categorization. Okay, so for example, right, we don't control for the fact that so if we compare men and women, we don't control for the fact that men might, if we look at sports, for example, Premiership football, we know that the men make a lot more money, right? Why might be one of the reasons, right? We could turn around and call it pure categorical inequality due to discrimination, which there probably is some. But we could also consider the fact that there's differences in the viewership, right, of the games, which directly influences the amount of money that's made, and so on and so forth. Okay, so we don't control for that. Or we don't control for maybe differences in education and things like that. What we do often do, though, is we look at those things side by side. So we might say, all right, let's look at men and women in the accounting profession. And we might find that there's a gender pay gap. Then we might want to go and look at, are there any differences in education? And generally, when we do that, we'll see there are no differences in education. Sometimes you might even see that women are better educated, yet for some reason they're being paid less. In which case, we can start to say, right, this starts to paint a picture of discrimination. But it's just important to know that they're not controlled in advance. We don't do any sort of statistical control when we are looking at categorical inequality. Give me a thumbs up if this makes sense. That's really all you need to know about it. What is categorical inequality? Being able to maybe identify it in a question, write about it when necessary, and that's about it. Cool. Going once for any questions, going once, going twice, and we're good to go. Sweet. So the next major type of inequality that we're going to be looking at is intergenerational inequality. Also very prevalent in South Africa. I think with high levels of inequality, we're probably going to have all the types here. Okay? So we look at intergenerational inequality. Intergenerational inequality. And this is essentially inequality that is intergenerational, if you get what I mean. The definition sort of tells it for you. This is inequality, right, that is passed down through generations. Okay, so inequality that has been passed down through generations. So that is when someone has rich grandparents, and the rich grandparent, the fact that the grandparents were rich had a direct effect on the parents becoming rich, which then has a direct effect on the children becoming rich. That's what we're going to call intergenerational inequality. Inequality that is being passed down from one generation to the other. Is everyone with me on this? Give me a thumbs up if we're happy with that. We're going to go into more depth now about intergenerational inequality. Okay, sweet. So, right, we're going to look at, here, we're going to, it's what's called the intergenerational transmission. So we've got the intergenerational transmission of economic differences. Okay, and the intergenerational economic transmission, the intergenerational transmission of these economic differences comes in different forms. All right, in other words, there's different reasons or dynamics behind this. Okay, so what do we think they are? Well, the first one is going to be the obvious one. The first one is going to be the inheritance, right? The inheritance of wealth. Okay, so I think that one's quite obvious. From one generation to another, right? They pass down wealth. So the inheritance of actual wealth is going to have an impact on this intergenerational inequality. The second one is inheritance of genetics, which might be considered somewhat controversial, right? And this is not saying that it's necessarily justified, but there will be some sort of genetics passed down from one generation to the other. And if those genetics, right, it could be intelligence, it could be physical attributes that has an influence on their ability to create value in the economy. And these inheritance of genetics are going to be passed down from one generation to the other. And if they have economic value, right, they're going to influence how much income someone's able to earn. And that's going to have an influence on inequality. The third and final one will be parent influence, right, on growth. So this is just the idea that, you know, parents can have an influence on their children, right, by ensuring that they grow properly from an education perspective, from a physical perspective, and so on and so forth. In other words, just keeping them healthy throughout their days. Is everyone happy with that? Give me a thumbs up if we understand this. Give me a thumbs up if we understand this. Well, they obviously intersect in many ways, guys. I mean, let's just, you know, we don't have a lot of time because there's quite a few things to still get through. But if we look at the South African story, right, a lot of it started with categorical inequality, right? Straight up, apartheid was a categorical economically unequal system. It was the whole point of it, it's to categorize people. So it all started with categorical inequality, right? Going way back in the day as well. And now today, we're looking at a situation where we've got massive intergenerational inequality that resulted from that, that is also intersecting with further categorical inequality that prevails today, okay? So I want you guys just to sort of see that given like a short essay type question, right? You would just need to very basically explain, right, how these different things work, what are the differences, when were they at play, and with using whatever information will be provided to you. This is an example of a question I could see coming up. I'm not 100% sure, but it is possible. All right, cool, guys. So we have a measurement for this. We actually now have a measurement for this. And this is what we call intergenerational elasticity. Okay, intergenerational elasticity. And basically, what this is going to be is equal to the percentage differences, right? The percentage difference in children's status right? In children's status divided by, so intergenerational elasticity is equal to the percentage difference in two children's statuses divided by the percentage difference in their parents' status. So we're looking at economic status, but there are other types of status that we could sort of look at, and this is going to influence. We're going to do an example here for this. Okay, so if there's any questions about the definition I've written on the board, just let me know. Okay, so intergenerational elasticity, percentage difference in children's status divided by the percentage difference in parents' status. Okay, so let's give an example. Right? Let's give an example. You've got two parents, right? Two parents. One parent earns 20%, right? 20% more than the other parent. And the associated child earns 14% more than the other child. Okay, so we could say we look at two parents back in the day. One parent was earning 20% more than the other parent, and then fast forward to the next generation, that parent's child is now earning 14% more than the other parent's child. Okay, so you've got maybe parent A who has child A, and you've got parent B who has child B, right? And these are the differences between the two. So if we had to calculate the intergenerational elasticity, right, we would just take the 20%, right? So my intergen elasticity is going to be equal to that 20% over, right? Sorry, 14% over 20%, and the answer then will be 0.7, right? 0.7, okay, which is very high, right? It's relatively close to 1, and what it's saying is there's a pretty big impact. If the one parent earns 20% more and the child earns 14% more, we've got a serious impact. If it was 0.1, then it would mean that that 20% turned into a 2% difference, which would mean it doesn't really follow through very much. Okay, so make sure you understand how to calculate intergenerational elasticity, and also how you would want to be able to turn this around. So in a question they could have given you, one parent earns 20% more than the other, intergenerational elasticity is 0.7, right? What's the difference in the income between the two children, right? And you would then need to be able to use this number. You would just basically set this as your unknown, and you would solve for 14. So you would say x over 20% equals 0.7, and you would solve for x, and it would be equal to 14%. Okay. Give me a thumbs up if we follow intergenerational elasticity. Going once, going twice. All right, sweet. So I'm just going to erase the board. If there are any questions, now's the time. Okay. So we're going to carry on then. So there's a lot of, it's a very wordy section. It's a very wordy section. Similar to the transmission, we talk about intergenerational mobility, right? And that again is changes in economic status, in economic or social status between parents and children. Okay, so we have high intergenerational mobility when there are big changes, right, along the way. So let's just make sure we understand this. It's not the same thing it's not exactly the same thing as the transmission. So I'm going to come to that question now, Maxine. But intergenerational mobility means when, right, let's say we're looking at one family when it's possible for there to be large changes between the generations, okay? So let's say some of those really rich grandparents, and then the parents of those, so we've got people A, and they have children, right? People A were rich, and then the kids were poor. And then those people, the poor people now have kids, and their kids are rich. What we're seeing there is high levels of mobility. Moving from one generation to the other, it was possible to go from rich to poor to rich, etc., right? So we would have high levels of mobility. So, Maxine, can you please explain what it means if elasticity is high? Okay, well, if we have high elasticity, then we would have low mobility. High elasticity would mean that any differences amongst parents that exist, right, are going to have a big impact on the children. So if two parents have large differences in income, their children will inherit those differences in income. High elasticity, right? So 20% income turned in 20% difference in income turned into a 14% difference in income in our example. That's relatively high, which means that there's going to be lower mobility when we're moving from one generation to the other, right? Going from rich to poor, from poor to rich, is not going to be as easy if there's high intergenerational elasticity. Okay. Maxine, just give me a yes in the, cool. Okay, cool. So that makes sense. So everyone, give me a thumbs up if you're happy with this, right? If you're happy with this, let me know. Okay, sweet. So under this, right, intergenerational mobility, we can also just say there's a positive relationship, right? There's a positive relationship between intergenerational inequality. So again, how do we measure this intergenerational inequality? We look at intergenerational elasticity. I'm not just going to write that down, but we measure our intergenerational inequality with that intergenerational elasticity. And we see that there's a positive relationship between intergenerational inequality and the cross-sectional inequality. So this just means different sections of the economy, right? This would be measured by my Gini, okay? So there's a positive relationship between intergenerational inequality measured by that elasticity measure, which is just if we denote with this funny E, and cross-generational inequality measured by the Gini coefficient. I mean, case in point is South Africa, okay? We have high levels of intergenerational inequality, okay? And those high levels of intergenerational inequality are a large part of why we have high levels of just general inequality, cross-sectional inequality, okay? Which means we've got very big differences between the poor and the rich in this country. Give me a thumbs up if you understand that, and then I will address the question that I missed. Give me a thumbs up if everyone's good. Okay, so we're just saying a positive relationship between intergenerational inequality and overall cross-sectional inequality. Okay, so someone doesn't understand how to interpret the answer, right? When it comes to the intergenerational elasticity. So let's do another example. Okay, let's do another example. Let's say our sorry, I'm going to use some shorthand here. Intergenerational elasticity, let's say it's equal to 0.8, right? What does that mean, right? What does that mean? So whenever you're trying to interpret something, go back to definition, okay? Go back to definition. What this is percentage difference in income of parent divided by the percentage difference income. Sorry, apologies guys, it's children on the top and parents on the bottom. Okay, so if my intergenerational inequality is equal to 0.8, right? What this means is that any percentage differences in income of parents, right? 80% of that difference was inherited by the children, 0.8. Okay, so for example, right, I can say 0.8 equals, right, difference with children over, right, let's say 10%. So if the parents had a 10% difference in income, right? When the parents had a 10% difference in income, then the difference with the children would be equal to 8%, right? If we solve this, okay? So yeah, let me know if that makes sense and how we've interpreted this. Right? We interpreted based on the definition of the equation. So if you're happy with that, guys, just give me a thumbs up all around. I'm sort of trying to look for your name there. You can maybe type in the chat if you're happy with that answer. Okay, cool, guys. So we're going to move forward now if there are no other questions. Can I please explain the positive relationship again, Hazel? No problem. Okay, so again, I just want you to think of South Africa. What we're saying is there's a positive relationship between intergenerational inequality and just general cross-sectional inequality. When you have a country where there's high levels of intergenerational inequality, so what that means is inequality is being passed through generation, then it tends to result in a society that has high levels of overall cross-sectional inequality. So my cross-sectional inequality is the type of inequality that we measure with the Gini coefficient. So that's just general economic inequality measured by different deciles or quantiles of the income distribution. So we're seeing that there's a big difference between the top 10% and the bottom 10%. And we're going to see that cross-sectional inequality is very high when intergenerational inequality is also very high. Give me a thumbs up if you're happy with that. Okay, cool. Fantastic. Then beyond that, we've got one last bit of very theory type stuff, and then we're going to jump straight into a model. Okay, so this actually comes from the very end of the chapter, but I think it's worth throwing in there. No, actually, not worth throwing in there. We're going to throw it in at the end. Okay, cool, guys. So what we're going to do is we're going to start setting up our model, right? We're going to start setting up our model to evaluate inequality. So this is coming from 19.4, if you want to go read in the book, right? 19.4, model to evaluate if there's too much inequality. Okay, too much inequality. So what we're going to be learning, what we're going to be seeing is you can't prevent income inequality. Okay, income inequality happens, right? And sometimes you're going to see a situation where everyone is better off with a bit of income inequality. I'm going to show it on the graph that in theory that is true. Okay, but we all know that there then are scenarios with way too much income inequality. So we're going to create a model where we would then look at that model using what's called, right? So we evaluate using the veil. Did I spell that right? That's the other way around, right? Veil of ignorance. Okay, so what is the veil of ignorance that what we're talking about here? The veil of ignorance is just saying, so this comes from Rawls, his theory of justice. All right, so if you want to write that down, it's Rawls. I think that's how you pronounce his name. Some economists. Anyways, what Rawls said was, if everyone has basic economic liberties, so there's no situation where one person is allowed to do something that the other one isn't. Everyone's got freedom. Everyone's got that situation. So if that's the situation, then we can create a veil of ignorance by saying, let's look at a world where income inequality looks like this. Let's say, the Gini coefficient looks like this. It's a 0.52 in Gini coefficient, and this group of people get this much income, and this group of people get this much income. Do you think it's fair, considering that you could be either of them? So from an outside perspective, before you essentially get plugged into this world, you could land up the rich person or you could land up the poor person, okay? And the veil of ignorance is to say, if you didn't know who you would you be happy with this outcome, okay? And if the answer is yes, then it's probably not too much inequality. And if the answer is no, I don't think that's fair, regardless of whether or not I'd be the rich person or the poor person, I'm not happy with that. I don't think that's a good setup. Then we would say that it's too much inequality from your perspective. Because at the end of the day, what we think is too much or too little is a matter of opinion. Okay, there is no right answer. As much as we all might like to think our answers are right, we're not 100% sure. Okay, so give me a thumbs up if you understand this veil of ignorance approach. You just look at it and you say, if I didn't know who I was, right? I'm going to evaluate now saying, I don't know if I'm going to be the rich person or the poor person at the end of it. But I'm going to have to decide now if I think it's fair. Okay, going once, going twice, we're done. Cool. So we're going to begin with, right? Feasibility. So the feasible frontier. You guys have learned about a lot of different feasible frontiers in your time last year. So we're going to be setting up another feasible frontier, okay? So we're going to be putting the income of the rich on one axis and the income of the poor on another axis. Now, we've very much simplified the economy, right? We know that there isn't just rich and poor, but there's things in between, okay? We're going to simplify the economy and say, right, we've got rich people and we've got poor people. We've got two sections of the economy. Okay, now if we were to have perfect economic equality, then we would move on the 45-degree line, okay? So the 45-degree line would be equality. That's my equality line. If I move away from my equality line, right, then I'm unequal. The further away, the more unequal we are. Cool? Give me a thumbs up if everyone's happy with this. With this 45-degree line, okay? So income of the rich on the y-axis, income of the poor on the x-axis. 45-degree lines mean all the values are equal on my y and x-axis along this line here, because it's straight down the middle. Cool. So if we had zero income and we started earning more, we would see that we would actually be earning along my 45-degree line, right? And then, okay, and then we start to see that at a certain point, we start to diverge from this line, all right? We start to diverge away from this line and say, cool, now from this point here, right? From this point here, which I'm going to call point A, okay? So this is my point A. We could stay here where everyone is equal, or, right? Or we could allow the rich to earn more and the poor to earn more. But as you can see, the rich are going to be earning at a much higher rate. So the rich start to earn more than the poor. And then eventually we reach a certain point, right? Where we're at point, what we're going to call point B, right? Where this curve starts to turn around, right? And what we're saying is now, when we go from point A to point B, okay, everyone is still earning more income. Everyone is still earning more income, okay? But when I start to move from point B, now the rich are earning more income, but the poor are earning less income. So now we're starting to see a trade-off. When we go from A to B, there's no trade-off. Everyone's earning more income, but the rich are earning income at a much higher rate. When I move from B to point, to what we'll call point D, simply because I will have a point C in a second, right? Point D, we've now maxed out the income of the rich, all right? And we start to move down, right? And we're gonna call this point E, which I'm gonna make sense of in a second. Okay, so just make sure that you've drawn this properly. This is going to be my feasible frontier. I just had to erase that to make space. Right, we're working now with the feasible frontier. Now the reason that we stopped at this point here, point E, is because we're going to say that's the minimum possible income of the poor. Right, we can't, their income cannot drop below, beyond E. If it drops beyond E, then sort of like everyone dies. It's that kind of situation. Right, it's the minimum income that is possible. Otherwise, the whole thing falls apart. Okay, so the very, very, very minimum income. Likewise, right? Sorry that I keep erasing here. I just want to extend my graph. We're going to see that D is where we see the maximum possible income, right? Maximum possible income for our rich, okay? Of the rich. And likewise, we can plot, right? This point, which is my max income of the poor. So we've got a minimum income for the poor and a maximum income for the poor, and then we've plotted a maximum income for the rich at this point. And remember, my axis is rich people's income. So we've got income of the poor, we've got income of the rich here, right? And along this curve, we can see the maximum income of the rich is at point D. We can see that the minimum possible income of the poor is at point E. And it's at point B that we have the maximum income for poor people. Okay, so I have a question asking me to repeat what happened from B to D to E. Sure, no problem. I'll actually start all the way at A. Okay, I'll start all the way at A. So when I go from A to B, both earn more. So when we go from point A to point B, we see that both the rich and the poor are earning more, which I'm already going to ask you guys, what do you think? Okay, what do you guys think? Is there a Pareto efficiency situation here? Do one of these Pareto dominate the other? Guys, tell me, what do you think? If moving from A to B, both earn more, does B Pareto dominate A? Right? Does B Pareto dominate A? And the answer is yes. Right? Very good. So we see that B Pareto dominates. If you're okay with it, I'm just going to put Pareto dominates A. B Pareto dominate A. Okay, why is that? Because when we go from point A to point B, we're making both better off. So nobody is worse off. Remember, Pareto efficiency or Pareto domination is when you can make at least one better off without making anyone worse off. In this situation, we've made both better off. Okay, so from A to B, everyone is happy. Okay, but from B all the way to D, when we move from B to D, right, we see an increase in rich income, right, with a decrease in poor income. Okay, so from B to D, there's an increase in rich income with a decrease in poor income. And if we did it the other way around, if we went from D to E, it would be the opposite. It would be a decrease in rich income and an increase in poor income. So there is no Pareto domination here, right? There is no Pareto domination. And in fact, what we can see is that everything, all the points, right? All the points from point B to point D are going to be Pareto efficient. Because whenever you move along this portion, right, you're going to give more income to one segment and take away income from another segment, right? And we know that Pareto efficiency is when you're at a point where you cannot make one better off without making the other one worse off. This is the definition you guys have been working with for a while, okay? So at every point here, because it's downward sloping, right? Because it's downward sloping, you cannot give more to one without the other. Moving down the curve, you're going to say decrease rich income, increase poor income. And moving back up the curve, we're going to increase rich income and decrease poor income as a result. Okay? So everywhere along here is Pareto efficient. Okay? And then if we were to move from D to E, right, what we would be doing is essentially decreasing rich income and decreasing poor income, right? So that's definitely not Pareto efficient. We're making both worse off, all right? And that tells us that D, what do you guys think? Do we see that D, Pareto dominates E? Why? Because both would be better off. Okay, we can see that D, Pareto dominates E, because when we go from E to D, both are better off. So it's definitely Pareto dominant. So what we're going to take away from this is that A, everything from A to B becomes a useless option. We don't even consider A to B. And D to E is also useless. We're not going to consider that. And this already starts to show that we are always going to accept some economic inequality, because moving from A to B means an increase in economic inequality, but at everyone's advantage. The increase in economic inequality resulted in everyone being richer, right? There was only an increase in economic inequality because the rich became, well, their income went up faster than the poor income went up, okay? But still, everyone was better off at the end of that. Cool. So does that mean that D is Pareto efficient because it dominates E? I wouldn't say that D is Pareto efficient because it dominates E, right? I would rather say that D is Pareto efficient because you cannot make one better off without making another one worse off. That's the reason that D is Pareto efficient. But that in turn results in it being Pareto dominant over point E. Okay, cool. Are there any other questions? Otherwise, if there's not, I want a thumbs up around. Give me a thumbs up if everyone understands this. Okay. And if we are good, then what we're going to do is take a 5-minute break. It's 11:15. We're going to start back at 11:20. Okay, everyone. So please, if you can, let me know. I'm gonna. Oh, I see that answer. That question is the never mind, so I won't answer it. Okay, so I'm going to, yeah, for those of you who want to take a break, you can, otherwise I'm going to address questions. We're going to start back in already now, what's almost close to 4 minutes and 5 minutes. So at 11:20, we're going to begin. So I'm going to be answering the question, please repeat why income inequality is necessary, okay? Well, some level of income inequality, it's not that it's necessary, it's not that we have to have it, but it's that everyone will be better off. So remember, when we went from A to B, both earn more, okay? So, right, Karab, I'm answering your question, so please stay with me. What we see is that at A, there's zero economic inequality. But when we move to B, where we've increased the income of the poor and we've increased the income of the rich, don't even think of it as poor and rich, because when we're at A, there is no rich and poor. So you've got segment 1 and you've got segment 2, and at A, segment 1 and segment 2 have the same income. Then we move to B, and now segment 1's income has increased really fast, and segment 2's income has increased not so fast. So now when we get to point B, this is the poor segment because their income increased by a small amount, whereas the rich people's income increased at a large amount. But still, everyone is better off, right? So if we remove economic inequality from point B to point A, we wouldn't be making the poor better off. The poor would be even poorer, okay? But we would be making, and we'd be making the rich much more worse off. So if we wanted to move from point B to point A, both segments are going to be worse off. And that's why we'd say, listen, we should at least accept income inequality to point B. Because at that point, right, at that point, everyone is better off than a situation like A. Give me a thumbs up, grab if that makes sense, or type in the chat actually if you can, because there's a lot of names. Okay, cool. I think what I mean was, doesn't Pareto efficiency happen at a point? Okay, thank you. So what I'm saying is every point on this range is Pareto efficient. So you're right, Pareto efficiency occurs at points. So this would be Pareto efficient. This would be Pareto efficient. This would be Pareto efficient. All the points on here would be Pareto efficient. If you're sitting on one of the points, you're Pareto efficient. Okay, so all my Pareto points from D to B are Pareto efficient, nothing else. Let me know if you're happy with that. Cool. Okay, and then without, if that's it, then I'm going to erase this just a little bit. Erase my notes around this. Okay, we're going to be starting back. Those questions took almost 5 minutes, so we're going to be starting back in about a minute, everyone. So if you can hear me wherever you are in your room or your apartment or your house or wherever you are doing this today, please start getting back into your seat. Okay. I'm actually going to, so you can decide if you want to erase this and draw a new one, or if you want to use this one. I'm still going to be giving some important details. Please note it is 11:20, and this content is quite a lot, so we're probably going to run about 15, 20 minutes overtime today. Just be aware of that, please. Apologies for that, but we'll see how we go. We might be able to speed up a little bit. Okay. Give me a thumbs up if everyone's back with me. If everyone's back with me, give me a thumbs up, please. Yep, we've got my thumbs up. Okay, sweet. So remember, we've got our 45 degree line. And what we've drawn is a curve that goes like this. We've got point A, we've got point B, we've got point D, and we've got point E. Okay? And what we want to do is we're going to put a point C now in between. And we're going to put a point C now in between. And it's at this point that we're going to draw a little tangent C. And we're going to say slope equal to -1. All right, slope is equal to -1 at point C. Okay, so We're going to start. So we're going to start in about 30 seconds, guys. Just getting my my things in order here. Yeah. Okay. Cool. So let's go. Let's begin. Is everyone with me? Going once? Going twice? Give me a thumbs up, everyone. Cool. So what are our Pareto? Is everyone with me? Because I'm not getting as many thumbs up as I would like. So just tell me if you're here. We're all here. Okay, great. So we know that our Pareto efficient point, right? Our Pareto efficient points are points B, C, and D. Okay, Pareto efficient are points B, C, and D. Pareto inefficient, okay, are points A and E. Remember, any point between B and D is Pareto efficient because the negative slope implies a trade-off, right? So any point between point B and D are going to be, right, inefficient. Now, we want to talk about the slope. So what is the slope? My slope of this feasible frontier, okay? What this is going to be equal to is the change in income of poor divided by the change in income, the change in income of the rich over the change in income of the poor. All right? So this is going to be our marginal rate of transformation. We can see that because we're drawing a line that plots the rich income and the poor income, when we move along the line, right, we're either getting more of both or less of one and more of the other, okay? So if we're looking specifically from point B to point D, we can see that when we have an increase in rich income, we have a decrease in poor income, and we can see it by certain amounts. So this is really important. You can use your slope to determine what is the trade-off, right? A very steep slope means that the rich are getting a lot richer, and the poor may be getting a little bit poorer if we look from point B to point C. But if we go from C to D, it's not so steep anymore, which means that while the rich are getting a little bit richer, the poor are getting a lot poorer, okay? So make sure you're able to understand how to use your marginal rate of transformation, which is change in income of rich over the change in income of poor, to understand sort of what the trade-off is looking at. Everyone give me a thumbs up if you understand this. Give me a thumbs up if you understand. We will talk about it a little bit more, but just in basic principles, do we understand how to interpret the slope here? Yeah, okay, cool. So now we're gonna see that at C, so why did I point out C, where we've got the slope of -1, okay? Why did I point out C specifically, where we've got the slope at -1? So at C, we see that the marginal rate of transformation is equal to -1, right? So what is this going to tell us? This tells us every 1 Rand increase in rich income results in a 1 Rand decrease in poor income. Decrease poor income, right? At C, we see MRT is equal to 1. Every 1 Rand, right, that the rich now earn is directly taken away from the poor, okay? And if we were to look at the points from B to C, right, we're going to see the absolute value of the number is going to be smaller. Okay, so from B to C, it's going to be less than -1, right? So what would that? Sorry, it's going to be more than -1. Apologies, it's steeper, so the absolute value will be greater. Okay, so from B to C, right? If the slope was, let's say, 2, it would be for every 2 Rand increase in rich income, we would result in a 1 Rand decrease in poor income. Or if we went from C to D and we saw that along there we had a slope of -0.5, then you would just be saying, all right, for every half a Rand increase in rich income, we have a 1 Rand decrease in poor income. Does everyone follow how we read this? Give me a thumbs up if we understand how to read the marginal rate of transformation. Otherwise, please type in the chat and just say repeat if you need me to. But if we can move forward, it would be good. If you think you've got it. Okay, so we're going to repeat that. So what we're saying is the marginal rate of transformation is equal to 1. Remember that's change rich over change poor, right? Income. I know it's very tiny. I hope you can see it. So change in rich income over the change in poor income. So every 1 Rand increase in rich income is a resulting decrease in poor income by 1 Rand, or vice versa. If we decrease rich income by 1 Rand, we'll increase poor income by another Rand. So if, let's say, for example, the MRT was equal to negative 0.5, right? And that would be somewhere between, right? Somewhere between C and D, okay? Somewhere between C and D. Then the way that we would read this, we would say that every 0.5 Rand increase in rich income results in a 1 Rand decrease in poor income. So that's how we're going to read our marginal rate of transformation, right? Musinta, just give me type cool, thanks, Shot, awesome, cool. So I hope we all follow this, okay? I can't spend a lot more time on this. You guys can see that from B to C, it's steeper. So we're going to have like -1.5 or -2. And then from C to D, somewhere between C and D, you're going to see -0.5 because it starts to change from -1 and go toward 0. Okay. So the last thing and the reason that we're honing in on C is because it's at point C that we have maximized. At point C, we have maximized overall average income. Okay, it is at point C that we maximize overall average income. Okay. Remember, point D is where we had maximum poor income, okay? But moving from point B to point C, we're able to make the rich quite a bit more richer at the expense of the poor becoming a little bit poorer, okay? So remember that when we go from B, if we go from B to C, increase in rich income larger than the decrease in the poor income. All right, obviously this is going to be in absolute, right? In absolute terms. So when I move from point B all the way to point C, I've increased rich income by an amount that's larger than the a decrease in poor income. In other words, the rich have been given more money than was taken away from the poor. And that's going to result in a maximization of average income. When we move from C to D, we now make the rich richer by an amount that is smaller than what we take away from the poor. And that means we're going to start to drop average income. So essentially from B to C, there is more overall income in the economy, whereas when we go from C to D, there's less income in the economy. Okay. So again, when we move from B to C, right? When we move from B to C, we can see here the slope, right? The slope is going to sit somewhere between, right? It's going to sit somewhere between infinity and -1. So the slope is going to be I don't. It's going to be great. It's going to be in absolute terms. It's going to be greater than 1. So what we're going to see is that the increase in income, right, from the rich people, so the rise that we see here is going to be bigger than the decrease in income amongst poor. Okay, and that means that we have an increase in the overall income and therefore an increase in the average income. Thumbs up if everyone follows this stuff. If you do, then I'm going to move on. We do have still quite a bit of stuff. So what do I mean when you say average income is maximized? I mean what it says. So I'm saying that on average, the average income of the total population has been maximized. Okay, so combining the rich and the poor, right? Overall average income is maximized. Bravo, let me know if that makes sense. Cool. All right, sweet. So just take a moment to digest everything while I erase this. We're gonna take 20 seconds just to erase and get our things in order. Okay, so that was quite a lot, and I think that you guys should be able to make sense of this. Okay, so let's carry on. Preferences. So now, again, what we said earlier is that how much income inequality exists in a nation is good or bad, or what is too much income inequality is a matter of an opinion, right? It's actually a matter of your preferences. Who do you care about more? What do you care about more, right? So your preferences are going to influence what you think is too much, okay? So when it comes to preferences, what we're going to have is we're going to have indifference curves that describe, right? Indifference curves that describe feelings towards income distribution. Okay, so on that same, this is sort of the preferences. This is falling under what is too much. Okay, so we had the feasible frontier, Cameron. Now we're looking at preferences, and then we're going to put them together. Cool. So I'm just filling in the model at this point. Okay, so preferences. We're going to have indifference curves that describe feelings towards income distribution. Okay, so we know what an indifference curve is, guys. Please. Let's remember what an indifference curve is. An indifference curve shows the different combinations of two things that we are indifferent about, that we feel are equal in the amount of utility that they create for us. Okay? So looking at your graph, you've got income of the rich and income of the poor. So your indifference curve is going to connect all the points that you think are the same for you. You don't mind if we're there or there, right? So when you move along the indifference curve, okay, in other words, we're looking at the slope. The slope of my indifference curve is going to be equal to what we call, it's going to be equal to the marginal rate of substitution. And the marginal rate of substitution is going to be equal to how much do I marginally value of poor income? So how much do I value a little bit extra poor income over the marginal value of rich income? Okay, so we're going to draw a few indifference curves now. So let's say, for example, we care equally. Okay, we care equally. If I care equally, remember this is the rich income and this is the poor income. If I care equally, what do you guys think the slope is going to be? What's going to be my marginal rate of substitution here? Do you think it's going to be more than 1, less than 1, or equal to 1? If I care equally about how much the rich get and how much the poor get. Okay, very good, guys. We're going to see that along my indifference curves, I see 1, I see 2, I see 3, and we're going to have a slope of -1. The MRS is equal to -1. Okay. Likewise, what if I only care about the poor, right? Can anyone tell me what the shape of my indifference curve would be? If I only care about the poor, right? And I'll give you a hint, it's either going to be horizontal or vertical. If I only care about the poor, do you think that I'm going to have horizontal indifference curve or vertical indifference curve? Okay, so I'm just going to give a moment for everyone to look. Say, okay. Some have said vertical, some have said horizontal, and the answer is going to be, we have we've got a good mix up here. Anyone want to throw in their piece? Anyone else? Okay, so cool. So a lot of you guys are getting it right, and for those of you that aren't, don't stress, right? If I care only for the poor, then what we're going to see, I'm not just going to give you the answer, I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to say, remember, when I move up from one indifference curve to the other, I get higher utility. So if I care only about the poor, then I'm going to have to get more, I'm going to have to move from one indifference curve to the other with increased income for the poor. So I don't care about the rich. If the poor have this much income, then that's all I care about. And that's going to be my first indifference curve. The only way I can get to another indifference curve is if the poor get more money, and so on and so forth. So it is vertical. Okay, and likewise, if I care only for the rich, if I care only for the rich, then we're going to see the opposite. Okay, we're going to go I see 1, I see 2, I see 3, because I don't care. So these are our extremes with our midpoint, right? And we'll look at what this means in a moment when we plug everything together. Okay, so I want everyone to give me a thumbs up if you're happy with this and if you understand what's going on here. All right, we said that, remember, if I care only about the poor, then what this indifference curve is showing me is that I don't care if the rich get richer. I'm indifferent. All I care about is this value. The only way I can move to a higher indifference curve is by seeing an increase in rich income. Increase in poor income along the way. Okay, what would be the MRS for the two extremes? It's going to be the slope, okay? So I think, correct me if I'm wrong, everyone, but the MRS here would be infinite, right? It's actually like an undefined slope, okay? And your MRS here would be equal to 0. I'm not willing to give up any rich income for more poor income. So the answer would be 0. Okay. Cool. Any questions? Other questions, anyone? Gonna give you a second to do it. I know that I move on beyond questions sometimes, so just feel free to hold on your questions. I'm also very much happy to hang out, afterwards when most people are leaving, and at the end of the workshop, just to keep answering any leftover questions that I might have moved on from a bit too quickly. Cool. Everyone's happy, so I'm going to move on now. Right? We're going once, we're going twice. Give me a thumbs up if you guys are ready for me. Cool. So the next thing that we're going to now do is essentially we're going to plug it all in together. So we're moving on now to the next section, sort of. They are all really, these sections are mixed, they lead on to one another. So we shouldn't really overthink it. So what is desirable inequality? And this is coming out of 19.5 if you do want to check out the book. Okay? So the first one that we're going to do, case 1, is we want to maximize the income for the poor. And this was an opinion, so smaller, max income for poor. And Rawls was of the opinion that that's what we should always be doing. We should be trying to maximize income for poor people. Okay, so let's set up our graph. We're going to put R for the rich of the income, and we're going to put P for the income of the poor. And we know that our curve starts on a 45-degree line. Okay, and then it diverges. And it does the kind of shape. Okay, sweet. So where do we find ourselves having equilibrium? Well, if I now plug in my indifference curve, like I usually would, and I said, okay, cool, we've got, the different indifference curves. Remember, the point is always to reach the highest indifference curve. Okay? So the point is to always reach the highest indifference curve. So I've got IC1, IC2, and IC3. And I get to my highest indifference curve, right? I get to my highest indifference curve by moving to this point here. Okay, and moving to this point here. So equilibrium at point, I think it was B. I'm going to keep using the point that we learned earlier, just because it's kind of useful. Well, actually, no. Sorry, I'm going to leave that because otherwise we're going to get confused. So we have equilibrium here. So that would mean that that is the amount of income that we think that poor and rich should have. Okay? So how would we describe this in terms of a utility function? Okay? How would we describe this in terms of a utility function? What we would be saying is, if we want max income for the poor, right, then my utility, which is a function of the income of the rich and the income of the poor, is simply equal to the income of the poor. We don't care about the income of the rich. So my function, utility, as a function of rich and poor, is actually only a function of the income of the poor. All we care about is the income of the poor. Guys, give me an answer. Give me a thumbs up if you understand this. Please give me a thumbs up if you understand this. Okay. Something very important to note. Inequality still exists. And again, so this is what we were talking about earlier. Some economic inequality is still to the advantage of the poor, right? In this case where we've said, let's just maximize income for the poor, sorry, I wrote that twice. So where we maximize income for the poor, right, we're still going to allow for some economic inequality because it's at everyone's advantage, okay? So if everyone's happy with that, give me a thumbs up, and I'm going to erase the board now. So if you're cool with me erasing the board, I will do it in a moment, okay? So Jessica, I'm going to explain the function. Everyone pay attention. I'm saying that the utility of the income of the rich and the income of the poor is equal to a function of the income of the poor only. Okay? So if we just simplify the function, we don't worry about any exponents or anything like that. We're just basically saying utility is equal to income of the poor. We don't care about the income of the rich. It's not even in our equation. Cool? Let me know if that's cool. All right. Awesome. I'm now going to erase the board. Going once, going twice. Cool. So the next case, okay, would be the opposite. Right? The next case would be the opposite. Maximum rich income. So in this case, I'm going to try and make it a bit smaller now. Maximize rich income. We're going to have R and we're going to have P, or YR and YP. Okay, I am jumping now. YR and YP. Maybe we should do that. It's the same thing, everyone. The same thing as to what I was doing before. I'm just giving it a different name now to match the utility function. So now again, we want to draw our curve. Okay, and what do we see? That our indifference curves are these horizontal ones, right? And we are going to maximize utility at this point. So that is going to be my equilibrium. Equilibrium, right? Maximum rich income. Okay? And why would we do this, right? In terms of the utility function, right? The utility function, which is supposed to be a function of YR and YP, is now really only a function of YR. So it's the opposite. It's the opposite of what we did before. Everyone happy with this? Let me know if we have any questions. Okay. What I didn't say at the beginning of all, with the other case and with all the cases, is equilibrium, right? Equilibrium is where MRS is equal to my MRT. I think that is something that you guys kind of all know here. But MRS is equal to MRT at the equilibrium. The slope of the indifference curve is equal to the slope of the feasible frontier. So we are all happy with, well, the person who we're modeling here is happy with it. Cool? Thumbs up if we're good. Let me know. All right. And the next thing that we're going to do is case 3. Okay? The next thing that we do is case 3, where we're inequality neutral. So inequality neutral essentially means that we don't have a difference. Okay? We don't care more about the rich, we don't care more about the poor, we're just neutral. There's more inequality, lesser inequality. We're not really too concerned. Okay? So what we do here, I'm going to actually talk about the utility function first, right? In terms of the utility function, we would say U is equal to, right? U is equal to 0.5 YR plus 0.5 YP. What this is showing is we basically take 50% of our caring and it goes towards the rich, and 50% of our caring goes towards the poor. In other words, we equally value the rich and the poor in terms of how much utility we derive from their outcome. Okay? Let me know if you're happy with that. Okay, let me know if you're happy with that. Everyone? Cool. Okay, so we're doing case 3 now, right? We're doing case 3 now, which is which I'm going to just carry on the side of the board. Inequality neutral, that's what my utility function would look like. So again, we draw the curve, right? YR, YP, and here's my feasible frontier. And now we know that our indifference curves have a slope of -1. So IC1, IC2, and IC3. Okay? Remember again, the slope is -1. Okay? So we have equilibrium at this point here. Right? That's going to be the YR amount. That's going to be the YP amount. Okay? So this is our equilibrium. And our equilibrium here is maximum average income overall. All right? We have maximum average income overall. And remember, how do I know that's equilibrium? Because my MRS is equal to my MRT at this point, because we've reached the highest indifference curve, which means we've maximized total utility. How's everyone doing? Are there any questions? Please let me know now. Right? Please let me know now. Cool. Thumbs up all around. I'm going to try, guys, and not, I'm watching the clock and aware of the fact that we're approaching 12, but I'm also not going to push too hard because I don't want to confuse you because I'm rushing. Okay? So just be prepared to stick around for a little bit, for a bit past 12 so we can get through this. I need thumbs up to let me know that I'm able to move on, right? I'm waiting for a round of thumbs up if we're good for me to move on. Okay? Yeah, we're cool, mostly cool. I'm going to assume the rest of you are just busy writing things down, and we're good. Okay, sweet. So we've seen this, and now the last thing I want to say is, right, how could you, so now that I'm starting to work with the utility function like this, how would we get the MRS? Well, I know that my MRS, remember, is essentially the change in YR over the change in YP. That's what my MRS on the indifference curve, okay? Right? Or it's sorry, actually, in terms of utility constant. So change YR, change YP, okay, is going to be in terms of my utility function, is going to be my MRS. So if we needed to calculate the marginal rate of substitution, given a utility function like this, right? What you do to get the MRS is you take D, and I will not be able to do a lot of math explaining. So if you need to go and look into the math behind this, please go and do it, and don't ask me now, right? But we know that, right, the derivative, the change in Y over the change YP is going to be DYR over DP. The derivative, right, of rich income, the change in rich income over the change in poor income. And if we were to solve for DYR over DP, right, we would see that it's equal to -1. Okay? We would be able to see that it's equal to -1. So that's something really important to take away from this. Okay, that's something really important to take away from this. I will show just some basic stuff. So how do we get this? We say U is equal to 0.5 YR plus 0.5 YP. We then say DU is equal to 0.5 DYR plus 0.5 DYP. And we set that equal to 0. We set that equal to 0. And I think You know, I can explain the theory behind the math, but the math, much more than the math, I don't want to go into. The theory behind the math here is we want to set the du, the change in utility, equal to 0, because then we know we've maximized utility, right? And that's what we need to see along along an indifference curve, that there's no change, right, in utility along a single indifference curve. Okay? So if I want to calculate the marginal rate of substitution along an indifference curve, I want to calculate the marginal rate of substitution along the indifference curve, I need to have du equal to 0. So we set this equal to 0, and then we solve for dyr over dyp. And when we do that, we can see that dyr over dyp is equal to minus 1. And that is my MRS. So that's how I calculated this. What you guys will start to see is you can just use, right? You can just set this up and solve following sort of a pattern like this. So even if the math is like super clear to you, the whole D, why do we throw D's in and all that kind of stuff, it's not really a big deal. But if you do want to go and do a math recap on derivatives from that 1010, go ahead and do so. Cool. How's everyone doing? Give me a thumbs up if everyone's happy, right? Give me a thumbs up if everyone's happy, please. And we're going to do one more example, and then we're going to take, and we're going to move on. Okay. Where is our utility function on the graph? Cameron, your utility function is not on the graph. Remember that indifference curves represent the changes, represent the combinations of whatever's on my y and x axis that yield equal utility. So we use utility functions to derive our indifference curves. Okay? So we use utility functions to derive our indifference curves. The utility function itself does not live on the graph. Okay? Fantastic. Cool. So I'm now going to erase this and give you a new example. So, case 4. Case 4 is my inequality aversion. Okay, so I just want to remind you. Remember, the whole point of part of what we're doing is we're doing this through the Rawls veil of ignorance. So let's say you're someone who's like, you know, I want to maximize my possible outcome. Remember, if you don't care about if you don't care about inequality and all you were trying to do was maximize your outcome. So if you're going to be thrown into the world and you're going to land up being one of the poor or one of the rich, you don't know, then you would use the previous example, because all you'd want to do is maximize average income, because that's going to give you the best possible outcome. Okay? But let's say you were like, but no, even if I landed up being the rich guy, I wouldn't want there to be so much inequality, because I don't like inequality regardless of landing up on the rich or poor side. Okay? So that's someone who's inequality averse. So you care about yourself, but you don't like inequality. Okay? So what does that mean? It means that my utility of YR and YP going to be equal to, right, the utility of YR and YP is going to be equal to 0.5 YP plus 0.5 YR. This is just because you're placing equal emphasis on both, because you might land up being poor or rich. But because of your aversion, we subtract 0.1 times by the difference between rich and poor. Okay? So your inequality aversion, right? Your inequality aversion is essentially shown here. I'm saying my utility is going to drop whenever there's a difference between rich and poor. Okay? So, you know I might land up being the rich or the poor person, so it's 50%, 50%, but regardless of the outcome, if there's some inequality, it's going to lead to a decrease in my utility at the end of the day. Okay? I hope everyone's happy with that. So if we were to then simplify this, right, what we would get is 0.6 YP plus 0.4 YR. So again, we're going back to this, and we can just say we're essentially putting more emphasis on the poor than we are on the rich, because we know that we don't like inequality. Okay? So repeating it one more time. This would be if you just are, you don't really care about inequality, you're just trying to maximize your outcome. So remember, we're going to throw you into the world. You don't have to be rich or poor. So you essentially apply the 50% probability that I'm going to be poor, and there's a 50% probability that I'm going to be rich. So I give a 50% to each of these incomes in terms of my final utility, like an expected value problem. But then we say, regardless of being poor or rich, okay, I'm going to be unhappy if there's a difference between rich and poor, right? If there's more income for the rich than there is for the poor, then I subtract from my utility. So it has a negative impact on my utility. Let me know, Matthew, if that works for you, if that makes sense. Okay, so we're gonna have a negative, right, a relationship between utility and inequality, the difference between rich and poor. Okay, Matthew, I hope that makes sense to you. Great. So now, if I want to solve my MRS, right? If I want to find my marginal rate of substitution, my MRS, to get my MRS, I'm going to have to say, right? MRS is equal to DYR over DYP. Okay, and if you were to solve for it like we would have done earlier, then the answer you'll get is negative 0.6 over 0.4. Please, guys, do not go and put, right? You see DYR, I put 0.6 here. So don't just assume that DYR means 0.4 because it's next to YR, okay? Rather, it's the other way around. So please ensure that you understand that. Right, so what we do is we say minus 0.6 over 0.4 is equal to minus 1.5. That's going to be our MRS, and that's going to be the slope of my indifference curves. Cool. Guys, if you are experiencing any connection problems, don't stress. You are going to have access to a recording of this for a short period of time after the workshop to ensure that you can go back and rewatch any section that maybe you missed out on because of connection problem. But I am going to just carry on because we need to push here with time. Okay, so we've seen that it's minus 0.6, minus 0.1. So finally, we can draw our graph here. We can say YR, YP, okay? Remember, that's my 45-degree line. And essentially, rather than maximizing at that point of 1, right? Rather than maximizing at that point of 1, we maximize at some other point. So remember, the slope here of these indifference curves is minus 1.5. I see 1, I see 2, I see 3. So this is my equilibrium, right? This is my equilibrium because it's where the MRS is equal to the MRT. The MRS is equal to the MRT at this point, and we have our equilibrium. Guys, give me a thumbs up if this makes sense to you guys. If it is, we're going to finish it off and we're going to move on. Okay, going once, going twice. I'm going to erase this part. So I just want to, for people who maybe got confused by the MRS, what is the MRS again? If the MRS is equal to minus 1.5, remember that's change rich income over change poor income. So if this is your MRS, how would I interpret it? I would say utility constant My utility is going to be constant if rich income decreased by 1.5, right? If rich income decreased by 1.5 and poor income increased by 1. So utility is constant if rich income were to decrease by 1 Rand 50 and poor income were to increase by 1 Rand. So it's saying I care more about the poor. I'm okay with the rich losing 1 Rand 50 if it means that the poor could earn 1 Rand more. So you can take 1,500 Rand away from the rich, give 1,000 Rand to the poor, and I'm happy with that. Okay? So that's how we interpret with MRS. Guys, let me know if we're okay to move on. We've got some final sections to look at, and then we're going to call it a day. We've just got a couple of other graphs to draw, and that's it. Are there any questions? I'm going to be waiting, looking in the chat box for some questions. So it's 12:09. We'll probably finish at about 12:30. Within the 30-minute extra that we're asking you guys to be ready, because this whole online workshop thing is quite new. Sometimes things take a bit longer. Okay, cool. So no questions. Round of thumbs up to let me know I can move on. I'm going to erase this now, right? I'm going to erase this now. All right, I've got a nice question. So for inequality averse preferences, the coefficient in front of YR, which was YR minus 1, which is 0.1 in this case, will depend on the degree of the aversion of that person's preferences. Yes. So will the possible equilibrium points be found between points B and C for inequality averse persons? That's a fantastic question. Thank you very much for asking it, Donato. So inequality averse people will be found between point B and C. So if we remember, right, that's a really good observation. So remember, this was point A, this was point B, and then point C was where we had slope equaling -1. So yes, inequality averse people, all of my inequality averse will exist there. Inequality averse will be along this portion, okay? And just like you said, that 0.1 represented some aversion. If it was 0.2, it would be even more averse. 0.3 would be even more averse, and so on and so forth. So that was great. Let me know if I've answered that for you and if you're happy with that. Cool. Everyone check out the question, right, there with regards to what I just said here. Okay, the answer to that question is yes. Cool, guys. So we've actually really gone through the toughest part. I wanted that to be the focus of the workshop, and it turned out to be the focus of the workshop. So we are going to have to make some sacrifices now in order to keep this thing going as we want it. But in the example, MRS was 1.5. So isn't that not between B and C? No, that would be between B and C, because if it's, remember, it's -1.5, and remember here it's steeper, right? It's steeper. So your slope is going to, the absolute value is going to be greater than 1. So it's going to be -1.1 or -1.2 or -1.3 or -2 or -4, right? Do you understand that, Cameron? Okay? It's at C that we have -1. So everywhere along here it's steeper. Everywhere up here it's going to be the opposite. It's going to be -0.9, -0.8, and so on and so forth. Okay. Cool. Cool. Right, guys. So some notes. Okay, some things that you gotta go and take a look at on your own. So 19.5 is a section that I'm gonna skip over. It's pretty simple, and it's based on everything that we've been talking about. It's very theory based. Basically, it's just turning around and saying that, right? Individual income depends on what they're given in advance. So I will write some basics, but I'm going to ask you to go through it. This is my 19.5. Okay, so income depends on endowment and the value of endowment. Okay, so what is your endowment? That's everything that you receive, right? By just being you, right? By being born into the family you were, in the country you were, and etc. So your endowment is going to be your wealth. It's going to be your human capital. It's going to be your race. It's going to be gender. It's going to be your citizenship. It's basically anything that you kind of just inherit by being you, okay? And has some influence on your income. And then the value of your endowment is going to influence how much you get out of that. So, you know, technology and institutions are going to influence our endowment, okay? Endowments are going to have an influence on economic inequality, and that's going to perpetuate throughout. So please, guys, go look at 19.5, which is just a little bit about this. And yeah, if that's it, we're going to move on to the last section we'll cover today, which is about explaining how we can have changes in inequality, and we're going to be looking and using the Lorenz curve for this analysis. So guys, give me a thumbs up if we're okay. I am aware that this workshop's been a little bit, it's been a bit, the pace is going up and down a bit, and I do apologize if it's been difficult to follow it at any point, but yeah, I hope it's clear and I hope you guys are learning. So I'm going to just get that down, write that down if you can, and we're going to be explaining changes in inequality, okay? So this is that, we skipped 19.6, right? You guys don't need to learn about 19.6, right? We go to 19.7, which is explaining changes in inequality. Okay, so the first one, right, is we're going to say, example 1, right, changes in the productivity of the poor. Okay, so right here. So example 1 is a change in the productivity of the poor. And in our setup here, right, just note, we're going to say poor equals workers plus unemployed, right? And the rich, right? The rich are equal to the owners, right? So the rich are the people that own factors of production, and the poor are going to be the workers and the unemployed in the economy. So we're going to be using stuff from last year here. So I'm going to be assuming a little bit of knowledge from last year's sections, and we're going to be using the labor market. So draw 2 graphs, one next to the other. Okay, they don't actually have to be perfectly next to the one next to the other, but because they don't relate across. But yeah, you can put them in your book like that, or on top of each other, and we look at the labor market. So remember how the labor market works. We've got the wage rate, right? And we've got labor. We've got people here, workers or labor. Here we've got our labor supply, right? And we've got the wage setting relationship, right? We've got the wage setting relationship. Guys, give me a thumbs up if you remember this stuff, if you understand what I'm writing here, okay? We've got the wage setting, the labor setting relationship. Okay, cool. So now let's say we started where this was the average product 1, and it resulted in a price setting relationship 1. Okay, so we've got average product of labor, and we know that the price setting relationship is derived from my average product of labor. Cool. So we see that this would be the initial point here. Okay, this would be L1. And we know that the difference here is my unemployment. Okay, is my unemployment. Now, if we see an increase, so in the example here, we're going to do an increase in productivity. Then we would see average product increase. So let's say we went to this point here, AP2. So we derive a new price setting curve, which is a percentage of the average product. We don't really need to worry too much about that, numbers, okay? And we see we go to L2, and we go from W1 to, right, W2, okay? So we've seen that change. Now, what's that gonna mean for our Lorenz curve, okay? What is that gonna mean for our Lorenz curve? We're actually more interested in this. This is what we're interested in the most, is the change in labor. We've had a change in labor from L1 to L2, and what we've had is a decrease in unemployment. So let's draw the graph. Now let's draw the Lorenz curve. So this is percentage income, and this is percentage population, okay? We've got our 100 and 100 points, and we've got our straight line. So remember how we did this before. We have the unemployed, the workers, and the owners. Okay, we have the unemployed, the workers, and the owners. So what we see here is that before, let's say this was my Lorenz curve. Okay, so I think you guys know what this is now, percentage population. So this is 100. We're going to say that, let's say the owners of the economy are 20%, and the workers in the economy were equal to, the unemployed were equal to 20%. Okay, so this would be my unemployed, this would be my employed, my workers, and this would be the owners. Okay, is everyone with me? Guys, let me know if we're following this, please. Okay, so the unemployed earn 0. The employed earn, right, along this line, 60% of the population earns this amount of income. Okay, and then the owners earn the massive, lion's share, as we know. Now, the percentage that the owners earn doesn't change, right? It doesn't change because we learned last year that that is determined by the profit margin. So the profit margin as a percentage has not changed. But what we have seen is that because labor increased, we saw a decrease in unemployment. We saw a decrease in unemployment. So we might have gone to this point, which would be now 10. And when that happens, right, we see the Lorenz curve, this portion of the Lorenz curve, shift inwards. So the effect of this was to push, right, was to push the Lorenz curve out, right, was to push the Lorenz curve somewhat out. Sorry, I apologize. I keep saying out, I meant to say in. Okay, so we go inwards. So what did we see here? We saw that average product of labor increased, leading to a labor increase, which leads to a decrease in unemployment, and this resulted in the Lorenz moving inwards. Therefore, decrease in inequality measured by my Gini coefficient. Okay? All we did is just show that when average product of labor increased, it led to a labor increase, right? And when we saw, right, when we saw labor increasing, that resulted in unemployed decreasing. So labor increasing shrunk the amount of unemployed. So we saw the number of unemployed people move from this point to this point. So we see this occur here. We see the Lorenz curve moving inward. Are there any questions? If there are not, give me a thumbs up if you're happy with this, and if I can move on to the next section. Okay, sweet. Cool. Awesome. Thank you, guys. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, so now what we're gonna do is 2 more examples, right? And then that'll be us for the day. So I'm going to erase this portion of the board now. Remember, guys, you can always just take a little screenshot. So if you haven't gotten this down yet, just click screenshot on your thing, and it's like taking a photo in the workshop, which I often see a lot of you guys do. So I'm going to erase now. Take a screenshot. Take a screenshot. If you don't know how to do it, take a camera. Take a picture with your phone camera, and we're gone. Okay, so now the next section, or the next example, so we're still in the same section, sorry. The next example is the removal of labor segments. Okay, the removal of labor segments. Now, a lot of this is in the notes that we've provided you with, right? In the notes that we've provided you with, we've given you notes. There are different types of segments. So what I'm trying to say is just look at your notes, and you're going to see that there are what we call the primary segment and the secondary segment. Okay, primary is the good jobs with the union and the job security and the good stuff. Okay, so that's going to be your primary job market. Then you've got your secondary job market, and the secondary job market is your short-term contract. Okay, people who work day to day. It's your construction workers standing on the side of the road looking for a job. That's your secondary market. So we're going to do a situation where we've got 2 labor segments, and then we've got owners. Okay, right? So you're going to have owners, right? Then we're going to have the primary segment, and we're going to have the secondary segment, and we're going to have the unemployed. So you can imagine, right? What's this going to look like? Well, the way it's going to look like is we're going to have, always going to have the unemployed. We're always going to have the unemployed, okay? Then we're going to show that there's a secondary, primary. So second, primary, and that last section is going to be our owners. Okay? So the unemployed earn nothing. The secondary, they earn, but their earnings are not great. Primary is a lot better, so we see a steeper slope. And then finally, we know that the owners are the ultimate winners in the economy, so we see that they've got the very steepest slope. Okay? So you can see who's earning more by how steep the slope is, because it's saying how much income each percent is getting. All right? Yeah, guys, give me a thumbs up if you understand how this thing has been has been drawn, right? Give me a thumbs up if you understand. We've got unemployed earning nothing. We've got the secondary market, secondary segment, which is your day-to-day contract workers who earn along this line. Then you've got primary, and then you've got owners. Cool. Now, if we were able to remove the segment, so if we could, essentially, let's not say remove, but merge the secondary and primary segments. If we were to merge the secondary and primary segments, then what we would see is that the new Lorenz curve would sit, the owners would still get the same, but now, right, everyone here would earn similar amounts. Everyone here would earn similar amounts. So what we see here is the Lorenz curve moving inwards once again. Okay? This would result in Lorenz moving inwards, therefore decrease in inequality measured by the Gini coefficient. Okay, it's quite a simple one. It's just saying instead of having this, we just dot these two lines, right? Because in that example now, the secondary and the primary markets, they merge, right? Let's say we make all the secondary workers primary workers. That is the final outcome of what we would see. Give me a thumbs up if everyone's happy with this, and we're going to do the last example. Okay, fantastic. Cool. Really trying to focus on the hard stuff here. So I'm going once, going twice. You can take your screenshots if you need to. Going once, going twice, and we're good. We're done. Okay, cool. So example 3, the final example of example 3 is the automation example. So I hope you guys see this stuff isn't too complicated. There's not like math, right? You can be, you can do numbers, right? There are numbers that can be associated with it, but it's very simple reading, like reading off of a graph. Okay, what do I mean by segment? I mean different segments within the labor market. So again, I'm going to want you to go look at your notes and read about the different segments, which, for example, we have the primary segment, which are the good jobs, people with job security, people with unions, people with long-term contracts, right? And then stable jobs, good paying jobs. And then we've got the secondary job market, people who work day to day, people who go rock up at a construction site and offer their work and get paid cash, etc., 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 right? So those are the different types of segments. So you get different segments within the labor market. If we were to remove segments, we could reduce income inequality. Hope that makes sense to you. Let me know if it does. All right, sweet. So the final one is example 3. Which is automation. Okay, and then we'll be done for the day. And I'm going to ask you to go and just look at a few things. But I think I've given you the tools that you need to be able to look at anything that we haven't covered. So here we're looking again, percentage income, percentage population, 100, 100. Okay, so what we're going to be doing here is setting up a situation where, right, before we had automation, okay, in our very basic example, all we have is one segment of workers, right, plus our owners. Okay, so before automation, the idea is that everyone's jobs were the same. There were no machines that we were using, so everyone was just a worker. Okay, everyone was just a worker. So we had the owners. Okay, who earned this much. Then we had the workers, and then we had the unemployed. Right. So remember, that's our unemployed. Okay, and that is our owners. And everyone else is the single segment, the single job segment. Okay, now afterwards, okay, that was my before. Now after, and guys, what is automation? If I can just give you, for those of you who might be wondering, automation is the use of machinery to replace workers. Okay, so we've got robots now. I hope that makes sense. So now after this, we've got two segments. Okay, we've got two segments plus owners. And what are our two segments? Right? What are our two segments? One segment, okay, one segment is the people whose skills are substituted by the robots. One is skills substituted. Skills are substituted by the robots or by the machinery. And the second one is the skills complement the robots. Okay, so the main thing to see here is you've got one where the skills have been substituted, and the other one that complement. Okay, so I mean, what do you guys think? Who's going to be who? So you're going to have, if you let's say have robots, right? That instead of having workers take things off the truck and make and put things on the truck and put things in the bags and basically do all those things, right? Then the workers who were doing that before, they're substituted by the robots. Okay. But then you've got other people. You've got the people who program the robots. You've got the people who make the robots, right? You've got the people who manage the robots and control the robots. They've got skills that complement robots. Okay? They're going to be treated quite differently than those who substitute. All right? So what happens to our Lorenz curve is we now have essentially, it's like the opposite of the example we did before. We now have, instead of having one segment of workers, we move into a situation where we've got two segments, right? You've got people whose skills are substituted, so their wages are going to drop, right? Skills substituted. And then you've got the other people whose skills are complementary, so their wages are going to increase, okay? So these guys are the ones where skills complement. And now we see that we've drawn our new Lorenz curve. So what's happened here is we've seen the Lorenz curve shifting out. So in this example, we've seen inequality rise. We've seen inequality increasing due to this. Do you guys understand this? Let me know if you do, right? If you have any questions about this, type it in on the chat, right? Please type it in on the chat if you have any questions, okay? Yeah, that would be great if you could do that for me, right? Oh, apologies, I've made one little small error. We're not going to go to the same unemployment point anymore. Some people will be unemployed as a result of this, okay? So we've actually seen as well, right? We've seen a new unemployment point. Sorry, we've seen a new unemployment point. So there's been an increase in unemployment, right? We've seen an increase in unemployment and we've seen a segmentation. Okay, there's an increase in unemployment. That's U1 and that's U2. Okay, I'm going to be waiting for questions. Otherwise, I think that we're going to call that for the workshop. I'm going to now tell you what we didn't cover in today's workshop. You know, I'm not going to be writing down the policies to help with technology transitions, but you can imagine, how could you try and prevent this from becoming a problem, right? Taking these skills substituted people and giving them, right, better skills that are more complementary, okay? So if we were seeing automation coming into our economy, rather than fighting the automation, we should rather give opportunities for people to get better skills, okay? I want you to look at the section about explaining trends in income inequality from 19.9. 19.9. It basically does an analysis where we look at Chinese rural workers, Chinese workers, and European workers and owners, okay? And just shows you, right, using an analysis, a method, the way that we've been doing this, right? It shows you how we could have certain trends in our income inequality changes over the days, okay? And then the last thing I want you to look at is addressing inequality. What I will tell you is that most of that is in your notes. It's about pre-distribution and redistribution types of policies, okay? Redistributive policies where we check, we have an influence on people's endowments, right? So that's structural changes where we're trying to influence the minimum wage. We're trying to influence property rights, who owns land, things like that. Okay, that's pre-distributive. Redistributive is more like after the fact, that's taxing people and then using that money to transfer to others. Okay, redistributive. All of this is in your notes with the progressive and regressive. Cool. So I think that's it for us now. I'm going to hang out to see if anyone has any questions. Otherwise, give me a thumbs up if everyone's happy, right? It was really fantastic having you all with us today. If it felt a bit wonky at times, I don't know, maybe it's just me, right? Sometimes I'm not always as confident as I may seem. So apologies if anything was confusing, but I really hope you guys found it helpful. Thank you, Robin. Thank you, Jenna. Thank you, Joshua. Right? Thank you all for coming. As I've been mentioning to everyone, times are tough for everyone, especially for us. Well, not but for all of us. Right? But our company has been hit quite hard by this crisis. So please spread the word around about our workshops, particularly to the first years who don't know about it. Please let them know about our workshops. We really, really, really need support, and we appreciate you guys so much. It's really fantastic having you guys at the workshop. The fact that we can do this is quite incredible. This technology, it amazes me, right? Even though I can't see you, I can feel you guys with me. So yeah, I've really enjoyed it, and thank you all very much. I'm going to hang out for about another minute in case you have any questions, right? Cool. So we see some questions coming in. So going back to inequality aversion, how did you get 0.6 for YP and 0.4 for YR, right? So it was the math, okay? Let me go and pull that part up. Bravo, it's a pleasure. Thank you for coming. Okay, so how did I get that? Give me a moment, please. Cool, I'm going to erase this. Oh, wait, before we go with case 4. The case 4. Oh, okay, no, this is not case 4, this is the example. All right, so I'm addressing the question in the, I'm addressing your question about first going to the question about 0.6 and 0.4. Okay, I'm going to tell you the honest truth. My math is not fantastic. So if you need a deep math understanding of the derivative, please go and do that yourself. But basically, right, what we did was we said, right, that U is equal to, or let me use a different color. U is equal to 0. So first we simplified to get this. Okay? And then what we did is we take a derivative. So we say du is equal to 0.6, right? 0.6 dyp plus 0.4 dyr. So the change in utility is equal to 0.6 times the change in yp plus 0.4 times the change in yr. That's the best that I've got from you in terms of these derivatives where it's not du over d something. Okay, that's the best that I can give you. Okay, so now, right, what we have to do is we have to set that equal to 0. And the reason we set that equal to 0 is because there is no change in utility along a indifference curve. Okay, so there's the change in utility is equal to 0. Got it? Are we happy with that so far? Yeah? Please let me know if you're happy with that so far. Cool. So now all you do is you solve, right? Remember what our MRS is. So our MRS is going to be equal to dyr over dyp. Okay? And you just have to do the math here, right? I take I take 0.6 dyp to the other side, okay? I then divide by, I take 0.6 dyp to the other side, I divide by dyp, right? And then I divide by 0.4. And that's how we were able to get minus 0.6 over 0.4. So essentially, you just take this and you solve for this, which gives you that answer. Okay, makes sense? You happy with that? Let me know if you're happy with that. But that's the, I skipped this step. That's how we got from there to there. Okay, under case 4, when talking about inequality aversion, which is this one, would you mind explaining how you got the MRS as well? Okay, so that's how I did that. So I've answered 2 questions now. Going back to the model to evaluate if there's too much inequality. You said that from B to C, we have an increase in overall income because the increase in the rich is larger than the decrease in poor in absolute terms. Yes. Is there a decrease in overall income from C to D with an increase in rich? Yes, 100%. And that's how you got that. Your logic there is perfect. Okay. So C to D, we see an overall decrease in income. Okay. Cool. For that exact reason. Cool. Are there any other questions? Great. If there's nothing else, I'm going to be turning off this meeting in about 30 seconds, because I do have another workshop in about 45 minutes. So if you have any questions, now is your chance. Otherwise, I'm going to be getting out of here. All right, Byron, Maxine, Tazo, Stephen, Hazel, all you guys, really thank you very much for being here today. I really, really enjoyed it. And yeah, we'll see you guys for the last workshop, which is tomorrow. Cheers, guys. Thanks a lot. Bye. Wait. Okay, I'm waiting. Go, Charles. But please do give me the questions soon if you can. I just need to prepare for my next workshop. So just let me know your question. If you want, I'm going to do something, and that is I'm going to unmute you. So let me know what your question is. You can. Will I have a workshop where we deal with questions only, like, you know, like past paper questions?
Yeah, like you usually have.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Cool. What's the question? So you want to know, is there a question about the workshops, or is there a question about the content?
Both, basically. So
okay.
You know so how you usually have a workshop?
Yeah. The workshops, we're gonna wait and we're gonna see what the assessments look like for the semester. But yes, I will try my best to do ones with questions. But we're really gonna wait and see what your semester is gonna look like.
before we react.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. It's a pleasure. Have a great day. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks, guys. Bye.